Before braids became a global fashion trend, before they filled Instagram, TikTok, and before we could walk into a salon and choose hairstyles from a picture on our phones, African people were already creating hairstyles which carried meaning. A braid was never simply a braid. For many African communities, hair could communicate identity, age, social position, beauty, community, and even important moments in a person's life. But where did African braiding actually begin? And how did something that was once deeply connected to African communities become one of the most popular hairstyles in the world? Today, we are going back in time to explore the history of African braiding, the meaning behind some traditional hairstyles, and how these traditions survived through generations, and how African braids eventually became part of the global fashion. Because when we look at braiding today, we are not just looking at hair, we are looking at history, we are looking at a source of income, we are looking at a major trend. When we ask where braiding began, there isn't one simple answer. Hair braiding is extremely ancient in different forms, developed in different parts of the world. But Africa has some of the oldest known artisans and archaeological evidence of elaborate hairstyling. Ancient Egypt artwork, sculptures, and preserved remains show people wearing carefully arranged hairstyles, including braids and plaited hair. And across the African continent, different communities develop their own techniques for working with tightly curled and coiled hair. This is important because there isn't one thing we can call African hair culture. A hairstyle from West Africa may have a completely different history and meaning from one developed country in East Africa. So, rather than thinking of African braiding as one hairstyle, it's better to think of it as a collective tradition that developed across different societies. Imagine living in a community where you could look at someone's hairstyle and learn something about them before they even introduced themselves. In some African societies, hairstyles could communicate social information. A person's hairstyle could be connected to their age, marital status, community, social position, or participation in a particular ceremony. Hair could also be connected to ideas of beauty and adulthood. For young people, certain hairstyles will accompany important transition in life, and during ceremonies, hair could become much more elaborate. This meant that styling wasn't necessarily something you did casually do. It could be part of a social rite. And because the hairstyle could communicate identity, the person creating the hairstyle needed skill. Braiding became an art. It required patience, precision, and knowledge that was often passed from one generation to another. Mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and other members of the community could teach young generation how to prepare and style hair, for knowledge about hair became a cultural knowledge. One of the most recognized African braiding techniques is called cornrows. And cornrows involve braiding hair closely along the scalp, creating rows that can be straight, curved, geometric, or highly elaborate. But here is what makes them fantastic. The scalp itself becomes part of the design. A skilled braider isn't simply making individual braids, they are creating a pattern. They have to understand sections, tensions, symmetry, and the direction in which the hair grows. Historically, similar scalp braiding techniques appeared in different African communities, and the patterns could be incredibly creative. Some hairstyles were simple and practical, others were elaborate work of art. Today, we might save a hairstyle from Pinterest or Instagram. Historically, the inspiration could come from our communities, your family, or the tradition you have been taught. The salon wasn't necessarily the starting point, the community was. Braiding also became a canvas for decoration. Beads, shells, threads, and other materials could be incorporated into hairstyles. And these weren't always just accessories. They could contribute to the cultural identity of the hairstyle. Across different African communities, braids and other adornment have been associated with beauty, status, age, ceremonial occasions. This is one reason African hairstyles can look so different from one community to another. Technique might be similar, but decoration, patterns, meaning can change. And this is where we need to be careful when talking about African hairstyle. A hairstyle that looks similar on the surface doesn't necessarily have the same cultural history everywhere. Context matters. And I feel like for me as a person, I've been in a place where different seasons of my life have come with different hairstyles. I have shaved because long hair didn't make sense for me as a season of my life. We continue. Then came one of the most painful periods in African history. The transatlantic slavery tradition forcibly removed millions of Africans from their homes and communities. People were separated from families, languages, and cultures. Practices were suppressed, and yet cultural traditions didn't simply disappear. African descent communities carried memories, skills, and practices with them. Hair became one of the places where identity could continue to survive and evolve. In the African and the Caribbean, African descended communities developed and adapted hairstyles under completely different circumstances. Some traditional practices were lost, others changed, and new hairstyles emerged from the combination of African tradition and the environment in which people lived. And this is an important part of the history of an African hair. It shows us that culture isn't always preserved exactly as it was. Sometimes culture survives by adaptation. Fast forward to the modern era. African braiding didn't disappear. Instead, it continued evolving. Traditional techniques began interacting with modern fashion, synthetic hair, extensions, new products, and new invention, international beauty standards. And styling, such styles such as braids, twists, cornrows, various intrusive or new braided patterns became increasingly popular around the world. And African braiders became highly skilled entrepreneurs. In cities across Africa, Europe, and America, a salon can be more than a place to get your hair done. It can be a social space. You sit down for several hours, you talk, you catch up on people's life, you discuss relationships, work, family, and everything happening in the community. Sometimes you arrive at the salon with one hairstyle in mind and leave with something completely different. And let's be honest, the conversations in the salons can be as important as the hairstyle themselves. Let me tell you the things I've learned in the salon. I can't believe I was missing out on those. Today, African inspired braiding has become a global phenomenon. You can see braided hairstyles on international runways, music videos, television, films, and social media. Celebrities wear them. Fashion designers incorporate them into collections. Millions of people around the world wear them. And this global popularity has created opportunities for African hairstylists and beauty entrepreneurs. But it has also created conversation about cultural appropriation. When an hairstyle become a global trend, people sometimes discover it as though it was something completely new. But for African communities, many of these techniques have much deeper histories. So the question isn't whether someone outside Africa can wear braids. The more interesting question is, do we understand and acknowledge where these traditions come from? There are also another side of modern braiding that we need to talk about. Braids are often described as protective styles and they can reduce daily manipulation. But an hairstyle isn't automatically protective just because it's a braid. If braids are installed too tight, they can place excessive tension on the scalp and hair follicles. Heavy extension can also increase the load on the hair, and keeping a hairstyle for too long without proper scalp care and hair care can create additional problems. So while we create the beauty standards or the beauty of braids, we should also learn how to braid properly because beauty shouldn't come at the expense of hair health. So, where did African braiding begin? That was the question. There isn't one single answer. What we do know is that elaborate hair traditions have across Africa, and the different communities develop their own techniques, patterns, meanings, and traditions. Braids have survived generations of change. They have crossed borders. They have traveled across diaspora. They have adapted to new environments. And today, they've become a global language of style. But perhaps the most beautiful thing about African braiding is the tradition behind it that continues. A mother teaches her daughter, a sister teaches a sister, a braider teaches an apprentice, another generation learns how to transform strands of hair into patterns of beauty. So, the next time you sit down in a salon and spend hours getting your hair braided or done, remember you're not just getting braided styles, you're participating in a tradition with an history, tradition of creativity, a tradition of identity, a tradition of community, and a tradition that continues to evolve one blade at a time. If you enjoy this journey across African hair, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And tell me in the comment section what African hairstyle should we explore next. See you in the next video.